If you ever find an unlabeled cassette wrapped in black tape with one thin sentence written on it, don't say your name. Throw it away. Not because it's cursed in the old theatrical sense, because the curse is modern, engineered, and painfully simple. It slips in through curiosity, and once it's inside, it leaves you with no other door. The first time Evelyn Carter heard her own voice, it wasn't from a phone call or a memory she could place. It came through an old radio set in a cramped back room of the Gray Harbor Clinic, in a remote northern coastal town where winter ate roads the way the sea ate stone. The blizzard wasn't just bad weather, it was a white wall that rose between the town and the rest of the world. Cell towers went silent, power flickered in tired pulses, and the highway to the nearest city vanished under snow in a matter of hours. Evelyn went into the radio room because Ben Walsh, ham radio hobbyist and the clinic's maintenance man, was shouting for her like his lungs were tearing. She expected exaggeration. What she found was Ben with a face drained of color, eyes locked on the receiver as if they'd been nailed there. "You need to hear this," he rasped. "This isn't random noise. Someone's calling." She leaned closer. The radio spit thick static, then, briefly, cleaned itself as if an invisible hand had lifted the interference on purpose. A woman's voice surfaced through the frequency, familiar in a way that made Evelyn's stomach drop. It was her voice. "If you can hear me," the voice said, "don't say your name. Don't answer with your name. If you say your name, it will know you." Evelyn froze. It didn't feel like fear at first, more like dizziness, like her mind had stepped on a stair that wasn't there. She told herself it was a trick of the signal, an illusion of similarity. But Ben stared at her as if he'd read the thought before she formed it. "It's not me saying it," he whispered. "It's a transmission, but it's you." A second part followed, closer, as if the speaker leaned into the microphone. "If it reached you, we're already late. If it reached you, the island isn't an island." Then the voice snapped away and the static swallowed the room. "What island?" Evelyn managed. Ben flipped through scribbled notes and frequency logs. "There's a signal coming from the sea, a place called St. Hallow. People call it the Holy Island. Old monastery, abandoned relay station. No one goes there in winter." Evelyn didn't like the way he said abandoned. Some words don't just describe a place, they describe a fate. Before she could answer, heavy pounding hammered the clinic's front door, fast, demanding, nothing like a frightened knock. A man's scream mixed with the wind. Evelyn grabbed a flashlight and rushed to the entrance with Ben behind her. They opened the door a crack and razor-cold air knifed in. A man stood in the snow up to his knees, swaying. Evelyn recognized him instantly. Colin Graves, a fisherman from the harbor. His face was flushed as if scalded. His eyes weren't simply red. They held a bright, wrong sheen, like light multiplying inside them. He laughed and sobbed at the same time. "Open! Open the door! Open the door!" Evelyn reached for his arm to pull him into warmth, and Colin snapped around with a speed that didn't fit his heavy body. He bit at the air near her shoulder, then lunged at the door as if he meant to shove it down. This wasn't the slow theatrical hunger of movie zombies. This was living violence, pure rage without thought. "Shut it," Evelyn shouted. Ben slammed the door and locked it. Colin kept pounding, then started driving his forehead into the wood, not merely trying to get in, but trying to break himself to break the barrier. He made broken noises, scattered words, but the sentence remained intact, returning like a sick chorus. "Open the door." Evelyn staggered back, breathing hard. This isn't normal." Ben swallowed. Like the message. In the hours that followed, snow wasn't the only thing sealing Gray Harbor. Another kind of closure tightened around them. The absence of news. No broadcasts, no internet, no rescue vehicles. Only Ben's radio and the Holy Island signal that came and went like a predator testing a fence. Evelyn gathered whoever she could into the clinic. Officer Miles Daniels, the town's sole police presence. Laura Finch, the schoolteacher, 2 teenage siblings who fled their home after their mother turned into a furious stranger. And Frank, the elderly cafe owner who kept insisting it was a passing madness, because admitting catastrophe was heavier than he could carry. By evening, the cases multiplied. Not everyone bit. Not everyone even spoke. But the transformation shared a single terrifying feature: sudden, unstoppable surge. People who'd been gentle all their lives began sprinting barefoot through snow, screaming, smashing car windows until their hands split, then rising without concern for pain, as if pain had become fuel. Evelyn tried to frame it medically: drug exposure, poisoning, neurological illness, but every theory collapsed under the speed. And the strangest part was the repetition. Most infected people kept chanting one sentence, sometimes in their own voices, sometimes in a hoarse tone that didn't sound like them at all. "Open the door." When Ben admitted he'd recorded the Holy Island transmission onto a cassette, in case the power dies, Evelyn felt a sharp, irrational twist in her gut, a primitive refusal, ahead of reason. "Don't play it," she said. Miles answered, "We need information. If this is a pathogen, we have to understand it." Ben pulled out the tape. It had no title, only black tape wound around it. He slid it into an old battery-powered recorder. He hesitated, then pressed play. The voice that emerged wasn't the same one they'd heard live on the radio. It was closer, clearer, and more dangerous. A man with a northern accent panting, describing the island sealing shut, an old hymn that did something to minds, then a sentence that cut the air like wire. The infection isn't just blood, it's meaning. If you understand it, you open a door inside yourself. Then came a chorus, multiple mouths speaking as one, a whisper that felt too intimate. "Open the door." Nothing exploded in the room. No one collapsed instantly. But Evelyn noticed something worse in their eyes. Everyone who heard it looked like they'd remembered something they'd never lived. Laura pressed her hand over her mouth as if to stop herself from repeating the words. Frank smiled briefly, then the smile vanished like shame. Ben stared at the recorder as if the whisper had been addressed to him personally. "Turn it off," Evelyn said. Ben obeyed slowly, like he was switching off something alive. That night, they tried to sleep in the clinic, but Grey Harbor screamed outside. Running feet, breaking glass, doors being pounded. The blizzard didn't hide it. It carried the sounds and threw them back, making it feel as if the violence came from every direction. Just before dawn, the thing that turned dread into certainty happened. The clinic's power died completely, and the radio, unplugged, began to whisper. It wasn't static. It was Evelyn's voice. "If you can hear me," the radio said, "then there's still a part of you awake. Don't say your name. Don't name anyone. Lock your doors, and lock the door inside you too." Miles shone his flashlight at the dead radio as if expecting to find a person inside it. How? They didn't have time for physics because the clinic's front door broke. 3 rushed in, then 5, then 10. Fast, brutal, alive. They weren't shuffling corpses. They were human bodies piloted by rage. Miles fired a warning shot. No one slowed. Laura swung a chair and knocked one down. It rose as if gravity didn't matter. Frank screamed and begged. Then a neighbor lunged at him, and a second later Frank was snarling too, the change flipping like a switch. "Back room," Evelyn yelled. "Storage." They slammed the metal storeroom door and bolted it. The pounding shook the hinges. Then, sudden silence. The kind of silence that tricks you into hope for 1 second. Evelyn had learned in emergency medicine that silence often meant something was gathering. "We're trapped," Ben panted. "No food, no power, no signal." Miles swallowed. "There's a radio station on the hill. If we reach it, we might broadcast a warning." Evelyn looked at the tiny storeroom window. The snow was thick, but moving was possible. Running was possible. And the outside, however lethal, might still be less lethal than staying. "If we go," she said, "we go now." They slipped out the back alley and ran between buildings. The blizzard muted them, but footsteps and distant screams echoed through main streets. They reached the police SUV, dead battery. Miles cursed and dragged them to the municipal garage where a small snowplow sat, half buried. The snowplow groaned but started. Ben drove because he knew the controls. They crawled through streets drowned in white, the town around them looking like a photograph with the sound turned off, until the first infected sprinted out of the storm, then another, then a pack. Do they see us? Laura whispered. They see movement, Miles said. They hear anything. But they didn't look like simple hunters. They looked like they knew the snowplow carried something. Knowledge, a signal, a piece of the door. At the hilltop radio station, a small glass front building, the door was locked. Miles broke it open. They rushed inside and found a surprise. A woman they'd never seen in Gray Harbor, sitting behind the broadcast desk, hands trembling above a microphone, a digital recorder beside her. She raised both hands. Don't shoot. I'm a journalist, Nora Hayes. I came to cover the blizzard. Then everything went wrong. There was no time to argue. Nora said she'd heard a strange emergency transmission before the networks died and tried to record it. When she said transmission, Ben looked at Evelyn like he'd just found proof of a nightmare. Ben powered up the station's small generator. Lights flickered on. For a heartbeat, they felt control return. Then the speakers spoke, without anyone touching a button. Don't say your name. And then the sentence that made Evelyn feel the floor fall away. It was her voice again, clearly speaking words she hadn't said today and didn't remember ever saying. If you turn on the broadcast, the voice warned, you'll open a door bigger than you. Nora stared at Evelyn. That's you. Evelyn couldn't answer. She looked at the microphone like it was a mouth. Ben tried to cut the feed, but the equipment behaved as if it belonged to something else. The Holy Island signal surged through the frequency like a stronger will. Outside, infected faces pressed against the glass, eyes shining, fists pounding in a single rhythm. It wasn't random. It was a code. We can't stay, Miles said. We move. Nora swallowed. St. Hallo has a stone causeway that appears at low tide. You can walk from the mainland, but in this storm, impossible. There's an old rescue boat at the harbor, Ben said. Maybe. The idea was insane. Every option was insane. Leaving town meant sprinting through rage. Staying meant starvation behind a door that would eventually fail. The island might be the origin, or the mouth. They ran down to the harbor. Snow blinded them, and infected bodies moved through it like fast shadows. In an alley, one of the teens stumbled. An infected lunged. Evelyn reached for the kid, but the attacker was quicker. Miles fired into the infected's head. It dropped. Silence for one breath. Then the running resumed. At the docks, the sea was violent, slapping ice and spray like thrown glass. The rescue boat was there, tied up, old but solid. Ben fought the engine. Nora clutched her recorder like it was the last rational object on Earth. Laura cried without sound. Before they could depart, a man stepped out of shadow near the storage shed. He wore torn clerical clothing, his face pale, his beard rimed with ice. He lifted both hands. Don't come closer, he said. I'm not like them. Miles aimed his weapon. Who are you? Father Dominic, the man answered. I was on the island, the monastery. Gray Harbor's nightmare had just gained a witness. Father Dominic spoke in broken breaths. It didn't start with a bite. It didn't start with blood. It started with a hymn. An old text, kept, forbidden, because they tested it years ago and failed. They thought it would calm crowds. It turned them into rage. Who are they? Evelyn asked, even as something in her resisted the answer. Dominic's smile contained no joy. People who believe they can steer the mind through sound. Military, science, or both. They left it here. They left the transmitter. When the storm struck the tower, the broadcast returned. So the tape is contagious? Ben asked. Not the tape, Dominic said. What's inside it? Words are only the skin. The infection enters when you understand. When your mind locks onto one meaning, meaning becomes a door. Nora frowned. So it's not biological? Biological is slower, Dominic said. What's happening is faster than blood, faster than air, faster than flesh. Evelyn wanted to reject him, but everything, the speed, the repetition, the single sentence, said reality had slid into something else. The boat finally caught. They pushed into the storm toward St. Hallo. Snow lashed their faces. Behind them on the dock, infected figures watched without chasing, as if they already knew they'd arrive first by a different route. The island rose from the white like a dark bruise, and on its highest point the old relay tower glowed faintly, not with normal electricity, but with a light that looked like a frequency made visible. They reached the rocky shore and climbed the slick path to the monastery. Parts of the stone building had collapsed. Doors hung open, as if someone fled without shutting anything behind them. Inside, there weren't neatly arranged bodies or cinematic gore. There was something worse. Marks of frantic running, overturned benches, torn hymn book pages, and words scrawled on stone in charcoal. "Open the door." Evelyn stared at the sentence and felt it wasn't written on the wall so much as written behind her eyes, as if her mind now sought the phrase everywhere because it had been trained to. Dominic led them to a cramped archive room behind the chapel. A metal safe had been forced open. Inside were old reel canisters and a notebook with a faded official stamp. "The tape was kept here," Dominic said. "They took it, or it left on its own." Nora opened the notebook, scanning frantically. It described a crowd-calming program, using certain frequencies tied to language and suggestion. Then the line that chilled the room. Phase 3. Induce aggressive response to redirect, then extinguish. Ben stared. So rage was a phase, not an accident. Above them, from the relay tower, a sound arrived. Not screams. Breathing. A collective inhale like the tower itself was alive. Then the words returned, not only in the air but in their thoughts, as if someone had learned how to read them aloud. "Open the door." Evelyn pressed a hand to her head. Pressure spiked behind her eyes. She almost, without choosing, whispered her own name, as if her mind searched for something solid to grab. The warning returned. "Don't say your name. Don't answer with your name." She clenched her jaw, but she realized the trap. The more you try not to think of your name, the louder it becomes. The mind is a door that hates being told it's a door. Then Evelyn admitted something she'd never shared. I've had this problem since I was young. Under stress, names slip. I remember faces, details, but names disappear." Ben blinked. "That's good." Dominic's eyes widened. "Perhaps that's the difference between collapse and resistance. If the meaning doesn't lock, if the door doesn't latch, then it can't enter fully." Miles breathed out hard. "So Evelyn might be immune?" Evelyn hated the word immune. It sounded like comfort. Nothing about this deserved comfort. But they needed a thread to hold. They decided to climb the relay tower. The goal was brutal and simple: stop the broadcast. If sound was the door, killing the signal might prevent it from reaching larger cities. Yet inside Evelyn a question hammered. Why her voice? Why did she hear herself before she'd done anything? They climbed the spiral stairs, colder with every level. Halfway up, they found a metal door ajar. Inside was a small room, an old transmitter patched with newer components, as if someone had upgraded the monster instead of killing it. In the corner sat a cassette recorder, and beside it, a black-taped cassette. No label. Nora reached for it. Evelyn grabbed her wrist. "No." "It's evidence," Nora snapped. "We need answers." "No time," Miles said. "They're coming." From below, they heard running on stone. The island itself seemed to be climbing toward them. Ben stared at the cassette like it was staring back. "Why is it here?" "We came to destroy it." Dominic's voice broke into a whisper. "Because you didn't come only to destroy it. Perhaps you came to record it." Evelyn didn't understand. Then understanding hit like ice water. The first message, the one with her voice, had to come from somewhere. If time was looping, someone at the end of this had to sit here, speak the warning, send it out, and ignite the beginning. A loop that fed itself like a snake swallowing its own tail. "We're part of the beginning," Evelyn breathed. Ben shook his head violently. "No, that's impossible." Impossible was sprinting up the stairs. Miles tried to disconnect the generator. Sparks flew. Lights blinked out, then returned in a dim glow as if the tower drew power from something else. The feed wouldn't die. The system was built to persist. "We jam it," Ben said, voice tight with desperation. "We overwrite it with another pattern." "With what?" Evelyn demanded. Ben's eyes had that look, an idea close to suicide. "If the infection is meaning, we inject opposite meaning, a voice that dampens response instead of triggering it, a pattern that won't let the mind latch." Nora laughed once, sharp and hysterical. "You're going to cure an apocalypse with audio?" "Not audio," Ben said. "Frequency, structure. The brain is a receiver. If we find a voice that won't latch, someone who can speak without closing the door, maybe—" All eyes turned to Evelyn. Outside the tower room, the pounding began. One heavy strike, then another, then another. Not random. A rhythm that mirrored the sentence itself. Evelyn swallowed. "I'll record, but I won't say the phrase." "They'll say it for you," Dominic warned. "Sometimes hinting is enough. The mind completes." Evelyn felt sick. Even a warning could plant the seed if it pushed listeners to fill in the meaning. That was the trap. The door loved being told not to open. "Then we break the meaning," she said. "We refuse to let it become one shape." The infected broke through the upper hatch. Chaos. Miles fired. Ben fought the metal door. Nora ducked behind the desk. Dominic whispered a prayer, not because it would stop rage, but because it was the last choice he still owned. Evelyn sat at the microphone anyway. Her hands shook. She could hear running, breathing, fists. But she could also hear the earlier warning in her own head. "If you can hear me, a part of you is still awake." She hit record and spoke carefully, trying to keep her words from collapsing into a single meaning. "If you feel yourself repeating one sentence, stop. If your mind grabs for a name, let it fall. Don't cling. Don't answer. You don't have to prove you exist with a word. Lock your house. Lock your curiosity. Something slips through curiosity and uses it as a door." Ben shouted, "Keep going. The signal's carrying." But the infected were at them. One grabbed Miles and dragged him down. Another lunged for Nora. Ben struck it with a metal wrench. It fell, then rose again. Rage didn't run out. It returned like waves striking rock. Nora suddenly gasped. "I have to upload this. If the world hears, if people get warned—" "No," Evelyn shouted. Too late. Nora's thumb hit a button on her satellite unit. Even with networks dead, a thin signal existed. Weak, intermittent, but real. A small upload. A fragment. Enough. Enough for one copy to escape. Ben's face collapsed into horror. "You opened the door." For 1 second, the tower seemed to tremble, not from wind, but from a silent laugh, as if the broadcast had been hungry and had just been fed. Dominic stared into the darkness beyond the infected. "The island isn't a place," he whispered. "It's an idea, and the idea just got out." Only one choice remained. Total destruction. Miles, bleeding, grabbed a fuel can and splashed it over the transmitter. "Light it," he barked at Ben. Ben hesitated. Lighting it meant burning the tape. Burning themselves, maybe. But the infected kept coming. Outside was a blizzard that didn't care. Inside was a door that wanted everyone to open. Ben lit it. Flames roared. Smoke thickened. The infected recoiled for a heartbeat, as if fire reminded them of pain, then surged again. Ben seized Evelyn's arm and dragged her to a side window. He smashed it. Cold air punched in. "Jump!" Evelyn jumped onto a lower ledge, then into snow. Ben followed. Dominic shoved Nora through as well. Behind them, the tower burned. They ran for the shore. The boat was still there, but the sea was worse. They shoved off anyway. On the rocks behind, infected figures gathered and watched. No chase, no dive, only eyes fixed on them as if the pursuit had become unnecessary. The upload had done the job. Out on the water, between snow and black waves, Evelyn realized she had one unbearable task left. If the loop was real, she had to do what she'd heard at the start. Send the warning that started everything. Warn her own past. Become the spark. "I have to send it," she told Ben, voice breaking. "I have to broadcast the message." Ben shouted over the wind. "After what happened? That's insane." "If I don't," Evelyn said, "maybe we never go to the island. Maybe no one warns anyone. Maybe everything gets worse." Maybe the warning is the only thread holding the timeline together. Ben looked at her like someone watching a friend decide to hold a grenade so it won't roll into a crowd. Finally, in a ruined voice, "Then make it different. Make it break the door. Don't feed it." They returned to Gray Harbor under a night sky that felt too low. The town was changed. Some houses yawning open, others sealed like graves, streets etched with footprints and frantic scraping, and in the air that heavy pressure that made words hard. They went back to the hilltop station, the only place still capable of reaching beyond town limits. The generator coughed on its last breath. Evelyn sat at the microphone. Ben tuned the frequency. Nora covered her mouth as if afraid speech itself might trigger something. Ben said, "We'll transmit on the same band the island used. Maybe we can interfere." Evelyn closed her eyes and imagined a stranger leaning toward a radio, curiosity pulling them closer the way it had pulled her. Then she spoke in the same exhausted, steady tone she'd heard before. "If you can hear me, don't say your name. Don't answer with your name. If you say your name, it will know you. If one sentence starts pulling you, let it drop. Don't complete it. Lock your doors, your real doors, and the door in your head. Something is coming from a single meaning, and it wants to turn your life into a corridor." She paused, then added something new, something she'd learned from Fire and Sea and Ben's face when he chose to burn a small world to protect a larger one. "And if you find an unlabeled tape, don't play it, not even if your curiosity tells you you're stronger." She stopped. Ben watched the dial. The transmission went out. For a moment, the air felt still. Then, on the same frequency, the island's voice returned for a single heartbeat, almost satisfied. "Good. Now we've heard you." Then silence. The generator died. The lights went out. The blizzard kept breathing. The story didn't end with helicopters or a cinematic rescue. It ended colder. Nora had uploaded a fragment already. A few minutes. A few minutes were enough for one copy. One copy was enough for another. One was enough for a single curious person in a distant city. 2 weeks later, when the storm eased and roads began to open, no one came. Perhaps the world was busy collapsing elsewhere. Or perhaps the door no longer needed roads. The last thing Nora wrote in her notebook, because she no longer trusted devices, was a single sentence. "The infection didn't reach us. We reached it the moment we listened." As for Evelyn, some nights she heard a soft click in her temple, as if an invisible tape reel turned slowly, and someone, somewhere, rewound the sentence in the background. She would rise, walk to her bedroom door, place her hand on the knob, and then let go. Because she finally understood the real horror isn't someone pounding on your door. It's curiosity convincing you to open it yourself.